They had seen rivers before, and they had crossed lakes in their own country, but nothing prepared them for the moment the transport truck slowed along a sandy road in Florida, and the horizon suddenly opened into a vast expanse of moving blue that stretched beyond sight. As the German prisoners stepped down under guard and heard the steady rhythm of waves rolling toward shore, many of them stood in silence, trying to understand how something so immense could exist without walls, without boundaries, and without end. Because in that first encounter with the ocean, it felt less like a landscape and more like the edge of the world itself. The road that led toward the shoreline narrowed gradually, shifting from packed earth to lighter sand that softened beneath the truck's tires. Pine trees thinned out, replaced by low coastal brush bending slightly under a steady breeze. The air carried a scent unlike anything inside the camp, salt mixed with warmth, sharp yet clean. The prisoners remained seated in the back of the vehicle, uncertain of their destination, until the trees opened completely and the sky expanded in every direction. When the truck came to a halt, the sound reached them first. It was not the mechanical noise of engines or distant machinery, but a steady, rhythmic surge rising and falling with measured persistence. The guards directed them calmly toward the edge of a wooden boardwalk that led across pale sand. Ahead, sunlight reflected intensely off a moving surface that seemed to shift endlessly. They stepped down carefully, boots pressing into sand that yielded under weight. The sensation itself felt unfamiliar, softer than gravel or soil. A breeze carried moisture across their faces, cooling the skin despite the Florida heat. As they walked forward, the full horizon revealed itself, water meeting sky in a straight, uninterrupted line. Some of the men stopped instinctively. Rivers and lakes, even large ones, possessed visible boundaries. Shorelines curved inward. Trees marked edges. Here, there was no opposing bank, no structure in the distance to define scale. The water extended outward until it dissolved into light. Waves advanced toward the shore in continuous sequence, folding and collapsing with white foam before retreating again. The repetition held quiet authority, neither hurried nor hesitant. It followed a rhythm beyond human command. The prisoners stood observing how each surge erased the marks left by the previous one, smoothing the sand as though resetting its surface. A few civilians moved along the shoreline at a distance, walking casually or standing ankle-deep in the shallows. Their presence did not disturb the vastness of the scene. The ocean absorbed motion without appearing diminished. It dwarfed individual figures effortlessly. For men accustomed to fences that defined every boundary of their daily existence, the absence of visible limits felt almost disorienting. The sky appeared larger here, unbroken by rooftops or watchtowers. Even the air seemed to move more freely, carrying sound across open space without obstruction. One prisoner walked closer to the waterline under supervision, pausing as a wave approached. When it reached his boots, the sensation startled him slightly. Cool, immediate, then gone as it withdrew. The ocean did not remain still long enough to be grasped. It advanced and retreated in constant motion. The guards maintained a measured distance, allowing the men to observe without interference. There was no explanation offered, no commentary about the scale before them. The experience unfolded without framing. It was simply there. As they looked outward, some tried to calculate distance. They understood that beyond that horizon lay continents and shipping routes, yet none of it was visible. The surface gave no clue to its depth or reach. It reflected sunlight in shifting patterns, masking detail beneath brightness. Back at the camp, space was contained and predictable. Paths led from barracks to mess hall to fence in orderly sequence. Here, space expanded without apparent structure. There was no visible perimeter. The ocean did not announce where it ended. The wind strengthened briefly, pushing waves forward with greater force before easing again. Seagulls circled overhead, their calls sharp against the steady crash of water. The environment felt alive yet indifferent, operating according to cycles that paid no attention to human presence. Standing on that shoreline, the prisoners encountered scale in a way they had not expected. The ocean did not feel like scenery. It felt like magnitude itself, vast, continuous, and impossible to enclose. And in that first sustained view of water stretching beyond sight, they understood that this landscape operated by its own logic, untouched by fences or schedules, indifferent to the boundaries that shaped their days. After the initial silence gave way to quiet movement, the men began to walk slowly along the shoreline under watchful supervision, their boots leaving brief impressions that the water erased within minutes. The sand shifted subtly with each step, warm at the surface yet cooler beneath. The sensation of ground that refused to remain firm unsettled some of them, as if even the earth here behaved differently than what they were used to inside the camp's packed gravel paths. The wind carried a steady current of sound that seemed to merge with the pulse of the waves. It was not loud in the manner of machinery or artillery, but persistent and layered. The crash of water against shore repeated without variation, steady enough to feel timeless. Several of the prisoners noticed how the rhythm neither accelerated nor hesitated. It maintained its pace regardless of human presence, as though the ocean operated entirely beyond observation. Looking outward, they attempted to trace a point where water ended and sky began. The horizon remained a thin, unwavering line, its distance impossible to measure with the naked eye. One of the younger men shielded his eyes from the glare and tried to follow a passing ship far in the distance, but even that small silhouette dissolved quickly into the brightness. There was no fixed object to anchor perspective. Some crouched near the edge of the water, allowing foam to wash around their hands. The salt stung faintly against small cuts and rough skin earned from months of labor. The taste of it lingered on their lips when the wind shifted. It was sharp, mineral, different from the freshwater rivers they remembered. This was not contained water drawn from a pump or pipe. It was raw, open, and immense. Further down the beach, civilians continued their activities without urgency. A man adjusted a small fishing line near the pier, while a woman gathered shells along the shoreline. Children ran forward toward the incoming waves and retreated laughing as the water chased them back. The prisoners observed this movement carefully. No one appeared cautious of the ocean's size. The vastness that overwhelmed them seemed ordinary to those who lived beside it. The guards allowed the men to approach no farther than a marked distance from the boardwalk, maintaining quiet oversight without interruption. There were no barriers separating them from the open water, only instruction. The absence of visible fencing felt unusual. The space itself provided no containment. It stretched outward without limit. One prisoner remarked softly that from where they stood, nothing blocked the view for miles. There were no hills, no buildings, no towers interrupting the line of sight. The ocean created an illusion of infinite reach. It was impossible to imagine enclosing such a landscape with wire or posts. As the sun climbed higher, the surface of the water shifted in color from deep blue to lighter silver tones. Reflections scattered across the waves, fragmenting into countless points of light. The scale of it remained unchanged, yet its appearance transformed constantly with angle and wind. It was movement without destination. Inside the camp, time was marked by bells and calls, by shifts in schedule and routine. Here, time felt less structured. The repetition of waves provided rhythm, but not division. Minutes passed without clear boundary. The ocean did not signal transition. It simply continued. For men accustomed to confinement measured in steps between fences, the openness of the shoreline created a quiet tension. The vastness invited thought of distance and travel, yet their position remained fixed under supervision. The water extended outward toward unseen continents, but they stood firmly on sand that still belonged to their captors. As they turned slowly back toward the boardwalk, glancing once more at the endless line where water met sky, they understood that this encounter was not about recreation. It was about scale. The ocean represented magnitude beyond measure, a natural force operating independent of war or imprisonment. And in facing that uninterrupted horizon, they confronted a space so open it felt almost abstract, as though the world itself had expanded beyond the boundaries they had come to accept. As the men continued along the shoreline, their attention shifted from the vast horizon to the movement directly before them. The waves did not arrive randomly. They formed in sequence, gathering height at a distance before breaking with deliberate rhythm near the sand. Each crest rose, curved, and collapsed into foam, then withdrew with a quiet pull that carried grains of sand back toward the sea. The repetition felt mechanical in its precision, yet entirely natural. Several prisoners stood still, observing the way the tide reshaped the beach continuously. Footprints disappeared within moments. Shell fragments shifted position. Small ridges formed and flattened again without visible effort. The ocean altered its own boundary line with each surge. The idea that a landscape could remain in motion while appearing stable unsettled them in a way they struggled to articulate. Further out, darker bands of water suggested depth. The surface, though shimmering in sunlight, concealed what lay beneath. Unlike rivers whose banks could be traced or lakes whose edges curved predictably, the ocean revealed nothing of its interior. It gave no scale by which to judge its reach. Its immensity remained silent. One of the prisoners walked parallel to the water, measuring distance in steps. He tried to estimate how long it would take to follow the shoreline to some visible landmark, yet none presented itself. The coast extended in both directions without interruption. The land and water met in a continuous line that offered no natural boundary. Behind them, the boardwalk and a few low buildings stood modest against the openness. The structures seemed temporary compared to the expanse before them. Even the sky felt altered here, larger and brighter than inside the camp. Without tall trees or fences constraining perspective, vision expanded outward freely. The wind strengthened briefly, lifting fine sand into the air and carrying it across the surface of the beach. Clothing shifted lightly against their bodies. The sensation of movement surrounded them from all sides: air, water, light. The environment refused stillness. Civilians continued their routines, unfazed by the scale that absorbed the prisoners' attention. A group gathered near the water's edge, speaking calmly while watching the horizon. A fisherman adjusted his line without glancing repeatedly at the distance. For those who lived near the sea, its immensity appeared ordinary. The guards remained composed, maintaining their positions without urgency. There were no barriers placed between the men and the water beyond instruction to remain within view. The absence of wire felt striking. The ocean itself did not function as enclosure. It represented openness without restriction. One prisoner remarked quietly that from this shoreline, a ship could depart and not see land again for days. The thought lingered among them. The water connected continents, carrying trade and travel across invisible routes. Yet from where they stood, none of those paths were visible. Only the surface remained, vast and uninterrupted. Inside the camp, every path led eventually to a fence. Movement had predictable limits. Here, movement suggested possibility without visible end. The horizon did not close in. It remained distant regardless of how long one stared at it. As the afternoon advanced, the light shifted slightly, casting subtle changes in tone across the waves. The ocean continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to observation. It did not respond to human presence, nor did it adjust its pattern. Standing there beneath an unbroken sky, the prisoners understood that they were not witnessing spectacle. They were encountering magnitude itself. The ocean did not belong to any single nation or camp. It extended beyond their circumstances, beyond immediate war, beyond visible boundary. And in confronting that scale, they felt both diminished and strangely expanded, aware that the world stretched far beyond the fence line that defined their daily existence. As the afternoon light softened and the sun began its slow descent, the color of the water deepened from bright silver to a darker blue that absorbed the sky's reflection. The breeze cooled slightly, carrying a fine mist that settled briefly on skin before vanishing. The prisoners remained near the designated area, watching how the shoreline transformed with shifting light rather than changing structure. The tide advanced incrementally, reaching higher onto the sand than it had earlier. The line marking the edge of the water moved without announcement. What had been dry ground an hour before was now claimed by foam and retreating currents. The ocean adjusted its boundary quietly, demonstrating that even its limits were flexible. One of the men knelt near a cluster of shells revealed by the retreating wave. He lifted one carefully, turning it in his hand. The surface felt smooth yet worn by time, shaped by forces invisible to the eye. It was evidence of constant motion beneath the surface. Nothing here appeared static. Everything carried the imprint of gradual transformation. Far out along the horizon, a faint silhouette of a vessel moved steadily across the water, small against the immense backdrop. It did not appear hurried. It crossed the line of sight slowly until distance absorbed it entirely. The sight reinforced scale. Even large ships diminished quickly against such expanse. Behind them, the wooden boardwalk creaked lightly as civilians passed along its planks. Conversations continued in calm tones. The ocean's magnitude did not disrupt routine. For the local community, it formed part of the landscape, constant and accepted. The prisoners reflected on how different this openness felt compared to the measured geometry of the camp. Inside the wire, space was defined by straight lines and corners. Fences met at precise angles. Barracks aligned in orderly rows. Movement followed fixed routes. Here, nothing followed straight edges. The shoreline curved gently, reshaped by tide and wind. The horizon formed a seamless arc rather than a boundary. As sunlight lowered further, the surface of the water began to glow with muted warmth. Reflections stretched in elongated patterns toward the shore. The waves did not cease or slow. They continued their steady sequence, indifferent to the changing sky. For several of the men, the encounter carried quiet contradiction. They stood within sight of something boundless, yet remained under supervision. The guard's presence was subtle but unmistakable. Freedom of movement extended only to a marked distance. The ocean suggested infinite reach, yet their path remained finite. Still, the experience did not feel staged or symbolic. It unfolded naturally, without commentary or spectacle. The guards neither explained nor dramatized the setting. The men were permitted to observe and absorb the scene without interference. One prisoner remarked softly that no fence could enclose such water. The thought lingered as the wind carried the sound of distant waves toward them. The ocean did not belong to walls or watchtowers. It operated according to its own cycles, beyond containment. As shadows lengthened across the sand, the group was signaled to return toward the truck. Several paused for one last look at the horizon, as though attempting to imprint its scale and memory. The line where water met sky remained unchanged, steady and unreachable. Walking back across sand that erased their footprints almost immediately, they understood that the shoreline would appear the same tomorrow and the day after, regardless of their presence. The ocean did not acknowledge captivity or conflict. It simply endured. In that recognition, the fourth hour by the water revealed something profound. The world extended beyond structure and schedule, vast enough to exist entirely outside the systems that confined them. And though they would return to fences before nightfall, the image of that unbroken horizon remained fixed in their thoughts as a reminder of scale beyond measure. The return to the truck felt quieter than the arrival. Sand brushed from boots in small clouds. leaving pale streaks along dark fabric. The men climbed into the back without being instructed twice, settling onto the wooden benches as the engine turned over and the shoreline slowly receded behind them. Through the open rear frame, they could still see the ocean for several moments, its surface flashing under the lowering sun before trees and dunes gradually concealed it from view. No one spoke immediately. The rhythm of the engine replaced the sound of waves, steady and mechanical. The shift from open horizon to narrow road felt abrupt, as if space itself had contracted. Pine trunks reappeared in orderly rows, forming vertical lines that blocked the distant sky. The scent of salt faded, replaced by dry earth and warm vegetation. One of the prisoners continued to face backward until the last fragment of blue disappeared entirely. Only then did he turn forward again, expression neutral yet distant. The encounter had not lasted long in measured time, yet its scale lingered beyond the hours spent there. As the truck rolled toward the camp, familiar markers returned. Fences came into view first, straight and deliberate, cutting across open ground with defined purpose. Watchtowers stood motionless against the sky. The geometry of confinement reasserted itself immediately. Every line pointed inward rather than outward. When the gates opened and the vehicle passed through, the sound of gravel under tires replaced the distant crash of waves. The men stepped down onto firm ground that did not shift beneath their weight. The contrast was physical as much as visual. Inside the wire, surfaces were predictable and unmoving. Outside, the earth itself had yielded and reformed with each tide. Evening routine resumed without alteration. Roll call was conducted, names checked against lists, and barracks doors closed at the designated hour. Nothing in procedure reflected the magnitude of what they had seen. Yet within the quiet of the bunkhouse, the memory of the horizon resurfaced with surprising clarity. Several lay awake longer than usual, replaying the moment when the trees had parted and the water first appeared without boundary. The ocean had not offered comfort or escape. It had offered perspective. Its immensity dwarfed not only the camp, but the conflict itself. It existed before the war and would continue long after. The prisoners understood that they had not been taken there for spectacle. The shoreline was part of the landscape, as ordinary to Florida residents as fields were to others. Yet for men whose daily view ended at wire and timber, the encounter with something truly uncontained altered perception. In the darkness of the barracks, the sound of wind brushing against wooden walls replaced the steady pulse of waves. Still, the rhythm remained faintly in memory. The ocean had demonstrated that scale could exist beyond confinement, that horizons could stretch uninterrupted even when movement could not. By nightfall, the camp returned fully to its contained rhythm. But beneath the quiet surface of routine, the image of that endless water endured, vast, indifferent, and immeasurable, reminding them that beyond the fences lay a world too large to be reduced to boundaries or walls. The ocean did not change their status, and it did not weaken the fence that enclosed their daily lives. Yet something in their perception shifted after that afternoon on the Florida shore. They had stood before a horizon that offered no visible end, watched waves advance and retreat without command, and felt wind move freely across open space untouched by wire or tower. The experience had not granted freedom, but it had introduced scale beyond the geometry of confinement. Inside the camp, space was measured carefully. Distances were counted in steps between barracks and roll call lines. Movement ended where fencing began. Outside, the ocean dissolved those measurements entirely. It stretched beyond sight, indifferent to borders, unaffected by schedule. Its rhythm did not pause for conflict or captivity. It simply continued. What lingered most was not the brightness of the water or the coolness of foam against boots, but the absence of limit. The horizon remained steady regardless of how long one stared at it. No landmark interrupted it. No structure defined it. The line between sea and sky resisted enclosure. Years later, some might remember the camp's routine in fragments: gravel paths, wooden bunks, the sound of gates closing at dusk. Yet alongside those memories, another image would remain: a vast expanse of water meeting sky under Florida light, too large to be grasped, too distant to contain. The ocean had not offered escape. It had offered perspective. It revealed that beyond the fences and beyond the war itself existed something enduring and immeasurable. And in facing that endless horizon, even briefly, the prisoners understood that the world extended far beyond the boundaries that defined their present moment. Thank you for spending this time here. If these quiet, true World War II stories matter to you, subscribing helps this channel continue.